The notice was barely legible, half-torn and weather-beaten, nailed crookedly to the trading post wall between an advertisement for mule feed and a wanted poster for some outlaw Elara didn't recognize. She'd almost walked past it, almost kept going to the next town, the next rejection, the next polite smile that meant not you. Remote mountain lodge, cook needed, harsh conditions, no quitters, no mention of pay, no description of the work, just those words, blunt and unforgiving as the mountains themselves. Elara pulled the notice down, her thick fingers smoothing the rough paper. Behind her, she heard the whispers start. They always did. Look at the size of her. Think she ate the last cook? Laughter. Quiet enough to pretend it wasn't meant for her ears. Loud enough to make sure she heard every word. She'd been hearing it her whole life. 28 years of being too much, too big, too heavy, too visible in a world that wanted women small and silent and decorative. Her mother had been delicate, bird-boned, the kind of woman men wrote poems about. Elara had been a disappointment from birth, arriving 10 pounds of squalling baby that kept growing and growing until she towered over everyone in her family. "You've got your father's build," her mother used to say, like it was a curse. And maybe it was. Her father had been a blacksmith, broad and powerful, dead from a fever when Elara was 6. She remembered his hands, massive, scarred, gentle when he'd lift her up to watch the forge. She'd inherited those hands. They were good hands, strong hands, hands that could knead dough for hours without tiring, hands that understood the alchemy of heat and time and transformation. But they were also hands that made respectable families pull their children closer when she walked past. Hands that made kitchen owners look nervous, calculating how much she might eat versus how much work she could do. As if being big meant being hungry. As if her body was evidence of greed rather than simply existing. Elara had stopped trying to explain herself years ago. She folded the notice and tucked it into her coat pocket. The trading post owner, a thin man with suspicious eyes, watched her from behind his counter. "That position's probably filled by now," he said. Not helpful. Just wanting her gone. "Where's Red Ridge?" He jerked his chin toward the mountains. 3 days north. If you don't freeze first." His eyes traveled over her. "They're looking for a cook, not, well, you sure you want to haul yourself up there?" Elara met his gaze. She'd learned not to flinch. "I'm sure." "Suit yourself. Rowan Hale runs that lodge. He's not exactly welcoming." "Don't need welcoming, need work." The man shrugged, already losing interest. Elara bought what supplies she could afford. Not much, just some dried beans and a bit of salt, and started walking. The first day wasn't bad. The road was still a road, rutted and rough but passable. She saw other travelers, though none who wanted to share the path with her. That was fine. She'd grown used to her own company. The second day, the road became a trail. The mountains rose around her like judgments, gray stone and dark pine, the air thinning with each step. Her legs burned. Her pack, light as it was, seemed to grow heavier with each mile. But Elara had learned long ago that her body, for all its supposed weakness, could do things people didn't expect. She could outlast the thin girls who looked delicate as flowers. She could carry weight that would break smaller backs. Her body wasn't the enemy. Other people's opinions were. By the third day, she was alone. Completely alone. Just her and the mountains and the sound of wind through the pines. That's when she saw Red Ridge for the first time. It wasn't much. A collection of buildings clinging to the mountainside like barnacles on a ship's hull. Everything looked temporary, as if one good storm might sweep the whole settlement into the valley below. She counted maybe 15 structures, rough cabins, a few larger buildings, and at the center, the lodge. It was bigger than the rest. 2 stories of weathered timber and stone, with smoke rising from 3 separate chimneys. The windows were small, the door heavy. It looked less like a place of hospitality and more like a fortress. Elara's feet hurt. Her back hurt. She was hungry, thirsty, and every part of her wanted to collapse. But she'd walked 3 days for this. She wasn't going to hesitate at the threshold. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open. The interior was dim after the brightness outside. It took her eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw a large common room, tables and chairs scattered around a massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall. The ceiling was low, beamed with rough-hewn logs. Everything smelled like smoke and old sweat and something else, something sour she couldn't quite place. "We're closed." The voice came from a dark corner, deep, male, unfriendly. Elara turned and saw him for the first time. Rowan Hale was not what she'd expected. Most mountain men ran to scrawny, all gristle and meanness, bodies carved down by hardship until there was nothing soft left. Rowan was different. He was tall, taller than her, which was rare, and built like the mountains themselves, all shoulders and hard lines. His beard was thick, more gray than black, though she guessed he wasn't much past 40. His face was weathered, creased with scars that looked old and deep. One ran from his temple down to his jaw, a white line against tanned skin. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were gray, cold as winter stone, and they assessed her with absolutely no warmth. "I said, we're closed. I'm here about the position." Elara pulled out the notice. "Cook needed." Rowan didn't move. He just stared at her, that cold gaze traveling from her face down to her boots and back up again. She knew what he was seeing, what everyone saw. The silence stretched. Elara refused to look away. Finally, Rowan stood. He was even bigger than she'd thought, moving with a kind of controlled power that made the room feel smaller. He crossed to her, took the notice from her hand, and examined it like he'd never seen it before. "This is 3 weeks old. Is the position filled?" "No." "Then I'm not too late." Another long pause. Rowan's expression didn't change. "You came up the mountain alone?" "Yes." 3 days?" 3 days. Something flickered in his eyes. Not warmth. Maybe a degree less cold. "You know what harsh conditions means?" "I can guess." "This isn't some inn in a pretty valley. We get hunters, trappers, men running from something or toward something worse. They're not polite. The winters bury us in snow for months. Supply lines freeze. We run out of everything. And when that happens, people die." Elara held his gaze. "I'm still here." "You don't look like you've missed many meals." There it was. The thing everyone thought, but most people were too polite to say directly. Elara had learned there were 2 types of cruelty, the kind that hid behind manners and the kind that hit you straight in the face. She'd take the second any day. "I don't cook for myself," she said evenly. "I cook for other people. That's the job. The job is keeping men alive through winter. Then let me cook something and you can decide if I can do it." Rowan studied her. She couldn't tell what he was thinking. His face was like the mountain itself, stone that gave nothing away. "Kitchen's through there," he pointed to a doorway. "There's not much to work with." That was an understatement. The kitchen was a disaster. Elara stood in the doorway and tried not to let her dismay show. It wasn't just dirty, it was neglected. Old grease coated the stove, pots were stacked in corners, unwashed, some growing things she didn't want to examine too closely. The shelves were nearly empty. A few sacks of flour, some withered potatoes, dried meat that looked more leather than food. The work table was scarred and stained, the floor was worse, and the smell, that sour smell from the common room was stronger here. Spoiled something, maybe multiple somethings. Elara set down her pack. This was a test. She understood that. Rowan expected her to take one look and leave. Expected her to be disgusted, overwhelmed, defeated. She rolled up her sleeves. First, she opened those windows, small as they were, to let in fresh air. Then she started a fire in the stove, a good hot fire. While it heated, she sorted through what was available. The flour was still good. The potatoes were salvageable if she cut away the soft spots. The dried meat was tough but not rotten. She found some old onions sprouting in a bin, some salt, a bit of lard that had gone slightly rancid but would do if she rendered it properly. Not much, but enough. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. Cooking isn't about what you have, it's about what you do with it. The only useful thing her mother had ever taught her. Elara worked quickly, efficiently. She'd done this 1,000 times, turning scraps into something edible, making nothing look like plenty. Her hands knew the rhythm. Chop the potatoes, render the lard, skimming off the worst of the rancid flavor. Soak the dried meat in hot water to soften it. Dice the onions. She found a large pot, scrubbed it clean, and started building layers of flavor. Lard first, heating until it shimmered. Onions next, letting them caramelize slowly, coaxing out their sweetness. The meat, chopped fine and browned. Potatoes. A careful amount of flour to thicken. Water, salt. More salt. The kind of simple stew that had fed armies and pioneers and anyone who needed to stretch limited resources. It wasn't fancy. It would never be fancy. But as it simmered, the kitchen began to smell less like neglect and more like food. Real food. The kind that stuck to your ribs and reminded your body that survival was possible. Elara tasted it, added more salt, tasted again. It needed something else, something to cut the heaviness. She searched the shelves and found, impossibly, a small jar of dried herbs pushed to the back, forgotten. Thyme, mostly. She crumbled some into the pot. Better. She heard footsteps behind her, heavy boots on wooden floor. "How long?" Rowan's voice. "It's ready now." She ladled stew into a bowl, one of the few clean ones, and handed it to him without ceremony. Rowan took it, looked at it. The steam rose between them, carrying the scent of onions and herbs, and something that might, if you were hungry enough, smell like hope. He ate a spoonful, then another. His expression didn't change. He finished the entire bowl in silence, then set it down on the work table. "You can start tomorrow," he said. "Pay is room and board plus 10% of what the lodge brings in. You'll cook 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. You'll bake bread, preserve what you can, and make nothing go to waste. If you quit before spring thaw, you get nothing. Understand?" Elara nodded. "There's a room upstairs, far end of the hall. Don't bother the guests. Don't cause trouble." He paused. "And don't expect anyone here to be friendly." "I don't." Rowan almost smiled. Almost. "We'll see if you last the week." He walked out, leaving Elara alone in the kitchen. She looked around at the mess, the work, the challenge of it all. Then she started washing dishes. The room Rowan had mentioned was small, barely big enough for a narrow bed and a chest of drawers. The walls were bare logs, the floor unfinished planks. A single window looked out over the mountains, dark now with approaching night. There was no lock on the door. Elara set her pack on the bed and sat down carefully. The frame creaked but held. She was exhausted. Every muscle ached, but underneath the fatigue she felt something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. This place needed her, not despite who she was, but because of it. Her hands, her knowledge, her ability to turn nothing into something. She fell asleep still wearing her boots, too tired to even undress. The next morning arrived with harsh light and the sound of men's voices downstairs. Elara woke disoriented, then remembered where she was. The lodge, Red Ridge, her new job. She splashed water on her face from the basin in her room, changed into her other dress. She only had 2, both practical, both worn, and headed downstairs. The common room had transformed. Where yesterday it had been empty, now it was full of men. Trappers by the look of them, rough and weathered, their clothes stained with blood and dirt. They sat at the tables in clusters, talking in low voices, but they all looked up when she appeared. The conversation stopped. Elara was used to stares. She kept walking, heading toward the kitchen. "That's the new cook?" someone muttered. "Rowan's lost his mind." "How much you figure she eats a day? Her own body weight?" Laughter. Not kind. Elara pushed through the kitchen door and let it swing shut behind her. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her face neutral. She'd learned young that showing hurt only made it worse. The kitchen was just as bad as yesterday. She'd cleaned 1 pot. There were dozens more. The stove was cold, and somehow she was supposed to feed all those men breakfast. She took a breath and started working. Fire first, always fire first. She got the stove going, the flames catching quickly on the dry wood. Then she assessed what she had. The flour. Some eggs she'd found yesterday in a cold box. Not many, but some. Lard, salt, water, pancakes. She could make pancakes. She mixed the batter quickly, her hands moving through the familiar motions. The griddle heated. She greased it and poured the first round of batter, watching the bubbles form on the surface before flipping them. Simple. Basic. But better than nothing. She worked steadily, building a rhythm. Flip, stack, pour, flip. The pile of pancakes grew. She found some old syrup in the back of a cupboard, tasted it carefully, still good, barely, and set it on the counter. When she had enough, she carried the platter out to the common room. The men looked up again, this time with something closer to interest. "Breakfast," she announced, setting the platter on the nearest table. Nobody moved. "What is it?" one of them asked suspiciously. "Pancakes." They poisoned? Only one way to find out. The man who'd spoken, young, maybe early 20s, with a scraggly beard and nervous eyes, reached out and took one. He examined it like it might bite him, then took a small bite. His expression changed. It's actually good. That broke the dam. Suddenly, everyone was reaching for pancakes, plates clattering, syrup spilling. The platter emptied in seconds. More, someone called out. Elara went back to the kitchen and made more. By the end of breakfast, she'd gone through every egg and most of the flour. The men were fed. Not happy. These didn't seem like men who did happy, but fed. That was something. She was cleaning up when Rowan appeared in the kitchen doorway. They didn't complain, he said. Coming from him, it sounded like high praise. They were hungry. They're always hungry. Usually they complain anyway. He paused. We need supplies. I'm heading down to the settlement. Make a list of what you need. Elara grabbed a scrap of paper and a pencil stub and started writing. Flour, salt, sugar, lard, eggs, potatoes, onions, dried beans, coffee, tea, bacon, dried fruit, molasses, yeast, baking powder. The list grew long. Rowan watched without comment until she handed it to him. He scanned it. This is expensive. You want me to feed them or not? I want you to not bankrupt me. Then tell me what I can have and I'll work with it. Rowan's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he might argue. Instead, he folded the list and tucked it into his coat. I'll get what I can. He left without another word. Elara spent the rest of the day cleaning. Really cleaning. She scrubbed every pot, every pan, every surface. She swept the floor until the broom came away clean. She organized the shelves, threw out anything spoiled or suspicious, wiped down the walls. By evening, the kitchen didn't look new. It was too old and worn for that. But it looked functional, cared for. The men came back for dinner. She'd made more stew, using up the last of what she'd started yesterday, plus some wild greens she'd found growing near the lodge. Not much, but it stretched the portions. They ate without comment, but they emptied their bowls. And nobody complained. That night, alone in her small room, Elara allowed herself a moment of cautious satisfaction. One day down. She'd lasted one day. The week that followed established a pattern. Wake before dawn, light the fire. Make breakfast, clean, prepare lunch, clean, make dinner, clean, fall into bed exhausted. The men began to expect her. Some even nodded when she brought out food. Not friendly exactly, but not hostile either. Rowan returned on the fourth day with supplies. Not everything on her list, not even half, but enough to work with. He dropped the sacks in the kitchen without ceremony. This is what you get, make it last. Elara didn't argue. She'd learned to read his moods, and today's was particularly dark. Something had happened in the settlement. She didn't ask what. She inventoried the supplies carefully. Flour, good. Lard, enough. Potatoes and onions, plenty. Some salt pork, dried beans, coffee. A few precious eggs. No sugar, no dried fruit, no molasses. Luxuries, apparently. Fine. She'd work with what she had. That night she made biscuits to go with dinner. Simple ones, just flour and lard and salt and baking powder, but they were hot and fresh and the men fell on them like starving animals. Haven't had decent biscuits in months, one of them muttered. Another said, better than decent. Elara felt a small warmth in her chest. Pride, maybe, or just the satisfaction of doing her job well. But not everyone was pleased. On the 8th day, a woman arrived at the lodge. She was thin, elegant in the way wealthy women are elegant, with carefully arranged hair and a dress that must have cost more than Elara made in a year. She swept into the common room like she owned it, and the men fell silent. Rowan, she called out, we need to talk. Rowan emerged from his office, a small room off the common area that Elara had learned to avoid. He didn't look pleased to see the woman. Margaret, don't Margaret me. The woman's eyes scanned the room and landed on Elara, who was carrying out lunch. Is this your new cook? It is. Margaret's lip curled. You can't be serious. I'm always serious. Rowan, everyone in the settlement is talking about this. You hired her? Margaret gestured at Elara like she was pointing out a stain. What were you thinking? I was thinking I needed a cook. There are better options, smaller options, options that won't eat you out of house and home. The room had gone completely silent. Every man was watching, waiting to see what Rowan would do. Elara stood frozen, the serving platter heavy in her hands. She wanted to disappear, wanted to defend herself, wanted to throw the platter at Margaret's perfect face. She did none of those things, just stood there trying to keep breathing. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He took a step forward, putting himself between Margaret and Elara. "The options," he said quietly, "are that Elara cooks or nobody eats. Those are the only options I care about." Margaret's eyes widened slightly. "You're actually defending her." "I'm defending my business. Now, if you're done..." "I'm not done. Nathan's been asking about you. He says you're struggling to keep this place running. He's made you a very generous offer. Tell Nathan the answer is still no." "You're being stubborn." "I'm being smart. Nathan wants this lodge because it's the only one on this route. Once he has it, he'll triple his prices and starve out every independent trapper and hunter in the mountains. I won't be part of that." Better than being part of a failure. Margaret's gaze flicked back to Elara. "Because that's what this is going to be. You can't save this place with her. Get out, Margaret." The words were soft but absolute. Margaret stared at him for a long moment, then turned on her heel and left, slamming the door behind her. The silence lingered. Then one of the men, the young one who'd tried the first pancake, spoke up. "For what it's worth, boss, the food's been better this week than it's been in months." Another nodded. "Beats starving. Beats yesterday's slop," a third added. Rowan looked at them, then at Elara. His expression was still unreadable, but he gave her the slightest nod, acknowledgement, maybe, or permission to keep existing. Then he walked back to his office and closed the door. Elara served lunch. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she kept them steady enough that nobody noticed. That night, after the dinner dishes were done and the men had dispersed to their rooms or into the darkness outside, Elara sat alone in the kitchen. The fire in the stove had burned down to coals, casting a soft red glow. She thought about Margaret's words, options that won't eat you out of house and home. She'd heard variations of that her whole life. The assumption that her body was evidence of greed, that being big meant being gluttonous, undisciplined, morally weak. Never mind that she often went hungry while cooking for others. Never mind that she'd learned portion control better than any thin person because she'd spent years trying to shrink herself into acceptance. Never mind that her size was just her size. The way her bones were structured, the way her body held weight, genetics and fate, and nothing she could control. But none of that mattered to people like Margaret. To them, Elara's existence was offensive, a failure of willpower made visible. She heard the office door open, footsteps crossing the common room. Rowan appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked tired, older than he had that morning. "You're still up," he observed. "Couldn't sleep." He walked over to the stove, opened the door, and added a few more logs to the coals. The fire caught, flames licking up around the new wood. "Margaret's not worth losing sleep over," he said. "She said what everyone thinks." "Maybe. Doesn't make it true." Elara looked at him. "Why did you hire me?" Rowan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I hired you because you walked 3 days through the mountains alone to get here. Because you looked at that kitchen and didn't run. Because you made something from nothing and didn't ask for praise." He paused. "And because I've learned that the people everyone else rejects are usually the ones worth keeping." It was the most he'd ever said to her at once. "I won't let you down," Elara said. "I know. If I thought you would, you wouldn't be here." He left as quietly as he'd come. Elara sat in the warm kitchen, watching the flames, and felt something settle in her chest. Not quite belonging. It was too soon for that. But maybe the beginning of it. The possibility. She'd lasted a week. Maybe she could last another. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall. The snow didn't stop. It fell steadily through the night, and by morning, Redridge was blanketed in white. Elara woke to the strange, muffled quiet that comes with fresh snowfall. The world outside her window transformed into something almost beautiful. Almost. Because beauty in the mountains was always dangerous. She dressed quickly, her breath fogging in the cold air of her room. The temperature had dropped sharply overnight. When she got downstairs, the common room was freezing despite the fire someone had started in the main fireplace. The men huddled close to it, their faces pinched with cold. "Morning," she said, heading toward the kitchen. A few grunted responses. One man, a trapper named Carson, who'd been at the lodge since before she arrived, looked up from where he sat mending a trap. "Going to be a hard winter," he said. "Snow's early this year." "How early?" 3 weeks at least. Maybe 4. He shook his head. "Last time it came this early, we lost half the settlement." Elara didn't ask what he meant by lost. She could imagine. The kitchen was even colder than the common room. Her fingers fumbled as she tried to light the stove, the matches slipping from her numb hands. On the third try, the kindling caught. She fed it carefully, building the fire until heat began to radiate from the iron surface. Breakfast was oatmeal. They had plenty of oats, and it would stick to the men's ribs better than anything else she could make with limited supplies. She added some of the dried fruit Rowan hadn't gotten, supplementing with a bit of the molasses he also hadn't gotten, so it ended up plain. But she toasted some bread to go with it and brewed coffee strong enough to strip paint. The men ate without complaint. That was becoming the standard. No praise, no complaints, just the quiet acceptance of food that was decent enough to keep them alive. Rowan came in just as she was serving the last bowl. He looked like he hadn't slept. His beard was more disheveled than usual, his eyes shadowed. "Supply train's not coming," he said without preamble. Elara stopped mid-pour. "What?" "Roads are already snowed in. Won't be passable until spring thaw. That's months away." 4 months? Maybe 5. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. Elara looked at the shelves, mentally calculating what they had versus what they'd need. "We don't have enough." "I know." "Not even close." "I know." Rowan's jaw was tight. He looked at the men eating their oatmeal, then back at Elara. "We'll have to ration, carefully." "How many people are we feeding? Right now?" 32. But more will come. Always do when the weather turns. People get stranded, need shelter. We can't turn them away. Elara did the math in her head. 32 people, 3 meals a day, for 4 to 5 months, with supplies that were meant to last maybe 6 weeks if they were lucky. "We're going to starve," she said quietly. "Not if you're as good as I think you are." It wasn't reassurance. It was a challenge. Elara met his eyes. "I'll need help." "What kind of help?" "Hunting, foraging, anything we can supplement. I can stretch what we have, but I can't make something from nothing." Rowan nodded slowly. "I'll take you out tomorrow, show you what's available." "Me?" "You need to know the land. Need to know what you can use." He paused. "Unless you're afraid of the cold." "I'm not afraid of anything that won't kill me." "Good, because plenty out there will." He walked away before she could respond. That night, Elara took inventory. Really took inventory. She counted every sack of flour, every potato, every egg. She made lists, calculated portions, figured out the absolute minimum they could survive on. The numbers were grim. She sat at the work table, staring at her calculations, trying to find some solution she'd missed. There had to be something, some way to make this work. "You look worried." She jumped. She hadn't heard anyone come in. The young trapper, the one who'd defended her to Margaret, stood in the doorway. His name was James, she'd learned. Barely 20, with a thin frame and eyes that seemed older than his years. "Just planning," she said. "Planning for disaster. Planning to avoid it." James came further into the kitchen. He moved carefully, like someone who'd learned not to take up too much space. "Can I ask you something?" "Why'd you come here? To Redridge, I mean? There's gotta be easier places to cook." Elara considered the question. No one had asked her that before. They'd all just assumed she had no other options, which was mostly true, but not in the way they thought. "I was tired of being told no," she said finally. "Every kitchen I tried, every inn, every restaurant, they all found reasons. Too inexperienced, too old, too—" She gestured at herself. "Whatever. This was the first place that just asked if I could do the job." "Can you?" "Do the job, I mean. Keep us alive through winter." "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm going to try." James nodded. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a small cloth bundle. "Found these today. Thought you might be able to use them." He unwrapped the cloth. Inside were wild mushrooms, the kind that grew in the forest even as the weather turned cold. "Are they safe?" Elara asked. "My ma taught me which ones to pick. These are good. Taste like earth and rain." Elara took them carefully. They weren't much, but they were something. Another ingredient, another option. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep cooking. Some of us haven't eaten this well in years. He left as quietly as he'd come. Elara looked at the mushrooms, then at her calculations. Maybe she couldn't make something from nothing, but she could make more from less. That was a skill, too. The next morning came brutal and bright. The sun reflected off the snow with painful intensity. Rowan was waiting for her outside the lodge, dressed in heavy furs, carrying a rifle. "You'll need warmer clothes," he said, looking at her thin coat. "This is what I have." He disappeared back into the lodge and returned with another coat, thick wool, too big even for her, probably his own. "Wear this, and these." He handed her a pair of mittens and a knit cap. Elara put them on. The coat swallowed her, but it was warm. The mittens were almost too small for her hands, but they'd do. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Everywhere." They walked for hours. Rowan showed her the forest, pointing out plants she'd never have noticed on her own. Pine nuts still clinging to branches. Rose hips, frozen but edible. Wild onions that grew near the creek, their tops brown but their bulbs still good underground. He showed her where animals congregated, where to set traps, how to read tracks in the snow. "See that?" He pointed to a disturbance in the snow near a fallen log. "Rabbit warren. You set a snare there, you'll catch something within a day." "I've never set a snare." "I'll teach you." They kept walking. Elara's legs burned from trudging through the deep snow, but she didn't complain. Rowan set a brutal pace, and she was determined to keep up. Around midday, they stopped near a frozen stream. Rowan pulled out some dried meat and hard bread from his pack and offered her half. "Eat," he said. "You'll need your strength." They sat on a fallen tree and ate in silence. The forest around them was quiet, except for the occasional crack of a branch under snow. "Why'd you come here?" Elara asked. Same question James had asked her. Rowan didn't answer immediately. He chewed his bread slowly, staring out at the white landscape. "Needed somewhere remote," he said finally. "Running from something? Aren't we all?" It wasn't an answer, but Elara understood it was all she'd get. Some people's paths were closed doors, and pushing just made them lock tighter. "The lodge," she said instead. "How long have you had it?" 5 years. Built most of it myself." "That's a lot of work for one person." "I like work. Keeps you from thinking too much." Elara understood that too. They finished eating and kept moving. Rowan showed her how to identify animal trails, how to dig for roots under the snow, where the deer came to drink even in winter. He moved through the forest like he was part of it, reading signs Elara couldn't see. "You'll need to come out here regularly," he said. "Check traps, forage, hunt if you can." "I'm not much of a shot." "I'll teach you that too." "Why are you doing this?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Helping me, I mean. You could just tell me to figure it out myself." Rowan stopped walking. He turned to face her, his gray eyes unreadable. "Because if you fail, we all starve. I have a vested interest in your success." It was a practical answer, logical, but something in the way he said it made Elara think there might be more to it. That maybe, just maybe, Rowan Hale wasn't quite as cold as he pretended to be. They got back to the lodge as the sun was setting. Elara was exhausted, her muscles screaming, her face raw from the cold. But she'd learned more in one day than she could have figured out in a month on her own. "Tomorrow," Rowan said, "we set traps." Elara nodded. She could barely feel her feet, but she nodded. That night's dinner was mushroom soup, James's mushrooms, combined with some of their dwindling potato supply and wild onions Rowan had helped her dig up. It wasn't much, but it was hot and filling, and the men ate it without complaint. Small victories. The days that followed established a new rhythm. Mornings in the kitchen, cooking and planning. Afternoons in the forest with Rowan, learning survival. Evenings back in the kitchen, preparing dinner and preserving what they'd gathered. Elara learned to set snares. Her first few attempts were disasters. The rabbits escaped or the traps failed to spring, but slowly she got better. She learned which plants were edible even in winter, how to render fat from game, how to smoke meat to make it last longer. She learned to shoot, though she was a terrible shot at first. Rowan had the patience of stone, correcting her stance over and over until she finally hit a target. "Better," he said when she actually struck a tree trunk. "I was aiming for the branch." "Still better." The work was brutal. Every day she came back to the lodge half frozen, covered in dirt or blood or both, so tired she could barely stand. But she was learning. More importantly, she was contributing. The men noticed. She heard them talking sometimes when they thought she couldn't hear. She's tougher than she looks. Tougher than most of us, probably. Did you see her haul that deer carcass yesterday? Thing must have weighed more than her. It didn't, but Elara didn't correct them. Let them think what they wanted. Not everyone approved, though. Margaret returned 2 weeks after the snow started. This time, she brought someone with her, a man Elara hadn't seen before. He was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of face that was used to getting what it wanted. "Rowan," the man said, his voice smooth and confident. "Good to see you." "Nathan," Rowan's voice was flat. "Didn't realize you made house calls. I make exceptions for old friends." Nathan's eyes swept the common room, taking in the worn furniture, the handful of men eating lunch, the general shabbiness of everything. "I wanted to discuss my offer in person." "There's nothing to discuss." "I think there is. Margaret tells me you're struggling. Supply lines cut off, winter coming early. That's a difficult position." "We're managing." "Are you?" Nathan's gaze landed on Elara, who was standing near the kitchen door with a serving platter. "I hear you've made some interesting staffing choices." "My staff is my business." "Your failing business." Nathan's smile was sharp. "Look, Rowan, I'm not here to insult you. I'm here to help. Sell me the lodge. I'll give you a fair price and you can go somewhere warmer, somewhere easier. You've worked hard enough." "No. Think about it. Another winter like this will destroy you. You'll lose everything, the lodge, your reputation, maybe your life. Is that really worth it?" Rowan stood up from where he'd been sitting near the fire. He was bigger than Nathan, broader, more dangerous. Nathan was smart enough to take a step back. "I said no. Now get out." "You're being foolish." "I'm being smart enough not to trust a man who'd starve out every independent operator in these mountains just to control the market." Nathan's pleasant expression cracked slightly. "Careful, Rowan. You might need my help before winter's over." "I'd rather freeze than owe you anything." Margaret stepped forward, her voice placating. "Nathan, perhaps we should—" "We're leaving." Nathan adjusted his coat, his composure returning. "But the offer stands. When you change your mind, and you will, you know where to find me." They left in a swirl of expensive fabric and barely concealed contempt. The common room was silent after they'd gone. Then Carson, the old trapper, spat into the fire. "Bastard wants to own everything," he muttered. "Got 2 lodges already. Charges triple what Rowan does and feeds folks slop." "Why does he want this one?" Elara asked. "Location," another man answered. "This is the only lodge on the northern route. Control this, you control access to the best hunting and trapping in the region. Every man here would have to pay Nathan's prices or freeze." Elara looked at Rowan. He was staring into the fire, his jaw tight with anger or worry or both. "We'll be fine," he said, though it sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "We've survived worse." But Elara wasn't sure that was true. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in her cold room, listening to the wind howl outside, thinking about Nathan's words. Struggling, failing, difficult position, all true. She got up and went downstairs. The common room was dark except for the dying fire. She added a log, watching the flames catch and grow. "Can't sleep either?" She turned. James was sitting in one of the chairs near the window, barely visible in the shadows. "Didn't see you there," she said. "Didn't mean to startle you." He came over to the fire, warming his hands. "Been thinking about what that Nathan fellow said." "What about it?" "He's not wrong. About us struggling, I mean. Food's already running low and it's barely November." "I know. So what do we do?" Elara looked at him. He was so young, too young for the fear she saw in his eyes. "We survive. That's what we do." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure something out." It was a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. The next morning, Elara woke with a plan. It wasn't a great plan, but it was something. She found Rowan in his office, poring over account books that looked depressingly empty. "I need to go further into the mountains," she said. He looked up. "Why?" "There are more resources out there, things we're not using. I've been reading about it. There are winter vegetables that grow in protected valleys, fish in the deep pools that don't freeze, caves where game shelters. If we can find them, those places are dangerous, especially in winter. More dangerous than starving? Rowan closed his account book. You don't know these mountains. It's easy to get lost, fall through ice, trigger an avalanche. People die out there, Elara. People die in here too if we run out of food. They stared at each other. Elara refused to back down. Finally, Rowan sighed. I'll take you. But we go prepared, and we don't take stupid risks. Agreed. And if I say we turn back, we turn back. No arguments. Fine. He didn't look happy about it, but he nodded. Tomorrow morning, early. Bring everything warm you own. They left before dawn, when the sky was still black and the stars seemed close enough to touch. Rowan carried his rifle in a pack heavy with supplies. Elara carried her own pack, smaller but still substantial, filled with bags and tools for gathering. The forest was different in the pre-dawn darkness. Shapes loomed strange and threatening. Every sound seemed amplified. The crunch of snow under their boots, the creak of frozen branches, the distant howl of something wild. They walked for hours, climbing higher into the mountains. The air grew thinner, colder. Elara's lungs burned with each breath, but she kept moving. As the sun rose, the landscape transformed. They were above the tree line now, in a world of rock and ice and endless white. The wind was stronger here, cutting through even the thick coat Rowan had given her. There, Rowan pointed to a valley below them, sheltered by surrounding peaks. Protected from the worst of the wind. Should be warmer than out here. They descended carefully, testing each step. The snow was deeper here, coming up past Elara's knees. She struggled through it, sweating despite the cold. The valley was exactly what Rowan had said, protected. The wind that had been screaming across the peaks was just a whisper here. And there, growing in patches along the southern-facing slopes, Elara saw green. Wild cabbage, she breathed. And look, leeks, maybe garlic. She stumbled forward, forgetting the cold, forgetting her exhaustion. She started digging, her hands working through the snow to the earth beneath. The plants were small, hardy, their leaves tough and dark. But they were food, real food. Rowan watched her work. How much can you carry? All of it. That's not realistic. Then help me. They spent the next 2 hours harvesting everything they could find. Wild vegetables, roots, even some frozen berries clinging to bushes. Elara's bag grew heavy, then heavier. She didn't care. There's a stream, Rowan said, pointing to where water trickled through the ice. Might be fish. How do we catch them? With difficulty, but they tried. Rowan found a deep pool where the water hadn't completely frozen. Using a makeshift spear, just a sharpened stick really, he managed to catch 2 small fish. They were barely bigger than his hand, but they were protein. Not much, he admitted. It's something. They kept exploring. Rowan found tracks. Deer, he said, sheltering in the valley during the worst weather. That meant they could set traps here. Come back regularly. Make this valley a supplemental source of food. By the time they started back, the sun was past its peak. Elara's pack was so heavy she could barely lift it. Rowan had taken some of her load, adding it to his own, but he was struggling too. The climb back up out of the valley was brutal. Elara slipped 3 times, nearly falling. The 3rd time, Rowan caught her arm, keeping her from tumbling down the slope. Careful, he said. I'm trying. Try harder. Can't afford to lose you. It might have been a joke. It didn't sound like one. They made it back to the lodge well after dark. The men were worried. Carson had apparently been about to organize a search party, but they stopped asking questions when they saw what Elara and Rowan had brought back. That's a lot of greens, James said, helping unload the packs. There's more where that came from, Elara said. We found a valley, protected, full of food. How far? 6 hours, maybe 7. The men looked at each other. 6 hours was a long journey in good weather. In winter, it was dangerous. Worth it? Carson asked. Elara nodded. Worth it. That night, she made the first decent meal they'd had in weeks. The wild vegetables, cooked with the last of their salt pork, and some of the fish Rowan had caught. The flavors were intense, earthy, almost bitter, but in a good way. A way that reminded you food came from the ground, from effort, from survival. The men ate in silence. Then one of them, a quiet trapper named Morris, who who rarely spoke, looked up. "This is good," he said simply. Others nodded. Rowan, sitting at his usual table near the fire, met Elara's eyes across the room. He didn't smile, but something in his expression softened just for a moment. Recognition, maybe. Or respect. The valley became their secret weapon. Every few days, Elara and Rowan would make the trek, bringing back whatever they could carry. The other men wanted to help, but Rowan refused. "Too many people. We'll strip it bare," he said. "Better to harvest slowly, let things regenerate." It was sound logic, but Elara suspected there was another reason. The journey was dangerous. Rowan didn't want to risk anyone else. The trips became a routine. A hard, exhausting, absolutely necessary routine. And slowly, imperceptibly, something shifted between Elara and Rowan. They talked more, not about anything important, just small observations, shared complaints about the cold, occasional dry jokes that might have been humor coming from anyone else. But from Rowan, they felt like gifts. Elara learned things about him. He'd been a soldier once, fought in some war he wouldn't name, lost people he wouldn't talk about, came to the mountains to forget, and stayed because forgetting was easier when you were alone. Except now, he wasn't alone. "Why'd you defend me?" Elara asked one day as they were climbing back from the valley. "When Margaret came. You could have just let me go." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. "I'm tired of people deciding who's valuable based on how they look," he said finally. "Seen too much of that. Good men dismissed because they were poor or scarred or wrong somehow. Meanwhile, bastards in expensive clothes got respect they never earned." He glanced at her. "You came up that mountain alone. You looked at a disaster and started fixing it. That's worth more than whatever Margaret thinks." It was the most personal thing he'd ever said to her. "Thank you," Elara said softly. "Don't thank me. Just keep us alive." But there was something warm in his voice, something that hadn't been there before. December came with more snow. The lodge was fully isolated now, cut off from the rest of the world. No one could get in. No one could get out. They were on their own. The food situation was precarious but manageable. With the valley supplies supplementing their stores, they had enough. Barely, but enough. Then the strangers started arriving. The first group showed up on a brutal night when the wind was howling and the temperature had dropped so low that water froze within minutes of being poured. 5 people, half frozen, begging for shelter. Rowan couldn't turn them away. 2 days later, another 3 arrived, then 4 more. Then a family with small children, blue-lipped and crying from the cold. By mid-December, they were feeding 47 people. The supplies were disappearing faster than Elara could replace them. She made the trips to the valley more frequently, pushing herself harder, taking bigger risks. Rowan protested, but what choice did they have? "We can't keep this up," he said one night after she'd returned from a particularly dangerous trip where she'd nearly fallen through ice. "What's the alternative?" "Turn people away." "Could you do that? Turn away a family with children?" Rowan's expression was grim. "No. But we're going to have to make harder choices soon." He was right. Elara knew he was right, but she wasn't ready to accept it yet. She started rationing more severely. Smaller portions, thinner soups, more filler, less substance. The men noticed but didn't complain. They understood the math. Elara herself barely ate. She told herself she wasn't hungry, that she'd snack while cooking, but the truth was simpler. There wasn't enough. Someone had to go without, and she'd decided it would be her. She lost weight. Not that anyone could tell under her layers of clothing, but she felt it, the way her dresses hung looser, the way her ribs became more prominent, the way exhaustion settled into her bones and wouldn't leave. Rowan noticed. "You're not eating enough," he said one evening, cornering her in the kitchen after dinner service. "I'm fine." "You're not. You look exhausted." "Everyone's exhausted." "Not like you." His eyes narrowed. "How much are you eating, Elara?" "Enough." "That's not an answer." She turned away, busying herself with cleaning. "I eat what everyone else eats." "You're lying." "I'm surviving, same as everyone." Rowan grabbed her arm, not roughly, but firmly enough to make her stop and look at him. "If you collapse, we all die. You understand that? You're not noble, you're stupid. There isn't enough. Then we find more. Or we ration better, or we make harder choices, but you don't starve yourself." His grip tightened slightly. "That's an order. You can't order me to eat. Watch me." They stared at each other. Elara wanted to argue, but she was too tired, and maybe, deep down, she knew he was right. "Fine," she said quietly. Rowan released her arm. But before he walked away, he said something that surprised her. "You matter. Not just because of what you can do. You matter." Then he was gone, leaving Elara standing in the cold kitchen, trying not to cry. The words stayed with Elara long after Rowan left. You matter. Simple words, but they hit differently coming from a man who measured everything he said like gold dust. She stood in the kitchen, her hands gripping the edge of the work table, and let herself feel it for just a moment. The weight of being seen, not judged, just seen. Then she got back to work because there were dishes to wash and bread to prepare for tomorrow, and 47 people depending on her not to fall apart. Christmas came and went without ceremony. Elara had never been one for holidays anyway, and the lodge wasn't the type of place that bothered with decorations or celebrations. But on Christmas morning, she used some of their precious sugar stores to make something sweet. Molasses cookies, thin and crispy, just enough for everyone to have one. The children's faces when she brought them out made the sacrifice worth it. One little girl, maybe 5 years old, held her cookie like it was made of glass, examining it from every angle before taking the smallest possible bite. Her mother, a tired woman with haunted eyes, mouthed thank you to Elara across the room. "Didn't think you had a soft spot," Carson said, watching Elara distribute the cookies. "I don't, just using up supplies before they go bad." "Right, that's why the kids got first pick." Elara didn't answer. She went back to the kitchen before anyone could see her face. Rowan found her there an hour later. He set something on the work table, a small package wrapped in rough cloth. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a knife. Not just any knife, a proper chef's knife, the blade sharp enough to catch the light, the handle worn smooth from use. It was old but well-maintained, the kind of tool that had seen years of work and still had years left in it. "I can't accept this," Elara said. "You can, and you will. Your knife is garbage. I've watched you struggle with it for months." Rowan's tone was matter of fact. "Consider it a business investment. Better tools, better food." "Where did you get it?" "It was my mother's. She was a cook, too. Not as good as you, but decent." He paused. "She would have liked you, I think." It was the first time Rowan had mentioned family. Elara ran her thumb along the blade, careful not to cut herself. "Thank you. Use it well." He started to leave, then stopped at the door. "And Elara? I meant what I said, about you mattering. Don't make me say it again." She smiled despite herself. Wouldn't dream of it. January brought new problems. The cold intensified to levels that seemed impossible. Water froze solid in buckets within minutes. The men had to break through ice on the water barrels every morning just to get enough for cooking and drinking. Frostbite became common. 2 people lost toes. 1 man lost 3 fingers. And the food was running out faster than Elara could replace it. She made the trip to the valley even in the worst weather, but the resources there were depleting too. The wild cabbage was picked clean. The leeks were gone. Even the fish seemed to have disappeared from the deeper pools. "We need to go further," she told Rowan one night. They were alone in his office, going over the inventory figures. The numbers were bad. Worse than bad. "Further where?" "There are other valleys, other resources. We just have to find them." "In this weather? Elara, it's suicide." "So is staying here and watching everyone starve." Rowan rubbed his face with both hands. He looked older than he had when she'd first arrived, the lines around his eyes deeper, his beard more gray than black now. "I can't lose anyone else," he said quietly. "I've already lost too many people in my life. I can't—" He stopped himself. But Elara heard what he wasn't saying. "You won't lose me," she said. "I'm too stubborn to die. That's not how death works." "Then teach me how to survive. You know these mountains better than anyone. Show me what I need to know." They looked at each other across the cluttered desk. Outside, the wind howled like something alive and angry. "All right," Rowan said finally. "But we do this smart. We take supplies for 3 days, we map our route, and if the weather turns bad, we come straight back. Agreed?" Agreed. They left 2 days later, before dawn, telling no one where they were going. Carson was left in charge. He'd run the lodge before and could handle it for a few days. Elara left detailed instructions for the kitchen, though she knew the men would probably just eat bread and whatever they could scrounge. The journey was harder than anything Elara had done before. They climbed higher into the mountains than she'd ever gone, through passes so narrow they had to go single file, across ice fields where one wrong step meant falling into crevasses deep enough to swallow a person whole. Rowan went first, testing every step, marking safe routes. Elara followed, her legs shaking with exhaustion, her lungs burning. But she kept going. On the second day, they found it. A massive valley, bigger than the first one, sheltered by mountains on three sides, and it was full of life. Elara stood at the edge and stared in disbelief. "How is this possible?" she breathed. "Hot springs," Rowan said, pointing to steam rising from several spots in the valley floor. "Keep the ground warmer, creates a microclimate." The valley was a winter oasis. Wild plants grew in abundance. Animal tracks crisscrossed the snow. There was even a herd of mountain goats grazing on a distant slope. "This could save us," Elara said. "Could, if we can get supplies back and forth." That was the problem. The valley was at least 2 days' journey from the lodge, maybe more in bad weather. Carrying enough food back to make a difference would be nearly impossible. "We need more people," Elara said. "A team. We establish a route, make regular trips. Too dangerous. Most of the men at the lodge aren't experienced climbers. They'd die out here." "Then we take the ones who are experienced. Carson, James, maybe Morris, train them on the route." Rowan considered it. "Maybe, but that means leaving the lodge with fewer defenders." "Defenders against what?" "Nathan." Rowan's voice was grim. "He's been quiet too long. That worries me." As if saying the name had summoned trouble, they saw smoke when they got back to the lodge 3 days later. Not from the chimneys, from the storage shed behind the main building. Rowan broke into a run. The shed was destroyed. Completely destroyed. Someone had broken in and set fire to their backup supplies. The dried meat, the extra flour, everything they'd been saving for the worst of winter. The men had managed to put out the fire before it spread to the lodge itself, but the damage was done. Carson met them at the door, his face soot-stained and furious. "Happened yesterday morning. We tried to save what we could, but how much did we lose?" Rowan's voice was deadly calm. "Most of it. Maybe 80%. Elara felt the ground tilt under her feet. 80%. That was everything. Their buffer, their safety net, their hope. "Who did this?" she asked, though she already knew. "No one saw anything, but there were tracks leading away from the shed, boot prints, fresh." Carson spat into the snow. "Too clean to be from anyone here. Someone came specifically to do this." Rowan was already moving, examining the tracks. Elara followed. The prints led away from the lodge toward the settlement, toward Nathan's operation. "I'm going to kill him," Rowan said quietly. "No, you're not." Elara grabbed his arm. "Because that's what he wants. He wants you to do something stupid so he has an excuse to take the lodge. Don't give him that. He just destroyed our food supply, Elara. He's trying to starve us out." "I know. But if you go after him, you're just proving him right. That you're violent, unstable, dangerous. That the lodge should be shut down for everyone's safety." She tightened her grip. "We beat him by surviving, not by becoming what he says we are." Rowan's jaw worked. She could see him fighting with himself, rage and reason warring in his eyes. Finally, he nodded. "Fine. We survive. But if he sets foot on my property again, I'm not responsible for what happens." The loss of the storage shed changed everything. The food situation went from precarious to desperate overnight. Elara did the math 3 times, hoping she'd made a mistake. She hadn't. At current consumption, with current resources, they had maybe 3 weeks left. 4 if they cut portions to barely survivable levels. And they were still 2 months from spring thaw. She called a meeting that night. Everyone in the lodge crowded into the common room. 47 people, all looking at her with varying degrees of hope and fear. "We've lost most of our backup supplies," she said without preamble. No point in softening it. "What we have left will last 3, maybe 4 weeks if we're careful." Silence. Then someone in the back asked, "What happens after that?" "After that we starve, unless we do something about it." "What can we do?" a woman asked. She was holding her daughter, the little girl who'd loved the Christmas cookie. "We're trapped here. No one's coming to help." "We help ourselves." Elara looked around the room, meeting as many eyes as she could. Rowan and I found another valley, bigger than the first one, with more resources. But it's far. 2 days' journey, maybe more. We need to organize teams, regular trips, bring back everything we can carry. That's insane, someone said. People will die out there. People will definitely die in here if we do nothing. Elara's voice was hard. I'm not saying it's safe. I'm saying it's our only option. Morris stood up. I'll go. Been climbing these mountains for 20 years. Rather die doing something than sitting here waiting for the end. I'll go too, James added, his young face determined. Carson nodded. Count me in. Others volunteered, not everyone. Some people were too old, too young, too inexperienced. But enough. Enough to form teams, to make regular runs, to maybe, possibly, keep everyone alive. Rowan stood by the fire, watching Elara organize the volunteers. She was dividing people into groups, explaining routes, setting schedules. She moved with confidence he'd never seen in her before. The uncertainty from those first weeks was gone, replaced by something harder, something necessary. When the meeting broke up, he approached her. You did good. Did I? Just sign people up to risk their lives in the mountains. You gave them a choice. That's more than they had before. Elara looked at him. What if I'm wrong? What if people die because I convinced them this was possible? Then they die fighting, which is better than the alternative. It wasn't comfort, but it was honest. Elara appreciated that. The first expedition left the next morning. 6 people, Carson, Morris, James, and 3 experienced trappers. Rowan wanted to go too, but Elara convinced him to stay. Someone needs to run the lodge, she said, and if this goes badly, we need you here to keep order. If it goes badly, you might not come back. I know. They looked at each other for a long moment. There were things neither of them was saying, things that maybe didn't need to be said. Be careful, Rowan said finally. Always am. She wasn't, though. Elara pushed the pace hard, driving the group forward even when they wanted to rest, even when the weather turned nasty, even when every muscle in her body screamed for relief. They had to make good time, had to get to the valley, load up, and get back before their absence became critical. The journey was brutal. One of the trappers, a quiet man named Davies, twisted his ankle on the second day. He insisted on continuing, limping along with a makeshift crutch James fashioned from a tree branch. They lost precious time, but leaving him behind wasn't an option. When they finally reached the valley, Elara wanted to cry with relief. It was still there, still full of resources, still their salvation. They worked frantically, gathering everything they could carry. Wild vegetables, roots, edible bark, anything with nutritional value. Morris managed to trap 2 rabbits. James found a cache of nuts some animal had stored for winter. Davies, despite his injured ankle, proved to be excellent at identifying edible plants. They loaded their packs until they could barely lift them. Then they started back. The return journey was worse than the trip out. The extra weight made everything harder. Davies's ankle was clearly getting worse, though he refused to complain. The weather turned nasty on the 3rd day. Not quite a storm, but heavy snow that reduced visibility to almost nothing. They were navigating through a narrow pass when it happened. One moment, Davies was right behind Elara. The next, there was a crack like a gunshot and a scream. The snow beneath him had given way. He'd fallen through into a hidden crevasse. Davies! James shouted, dropping to his belly and crawling to the edge. Davies, can you hear me? A groan from below. He was alive. But Elara could see the problem immediately. The crevasse was deep, at least 20 feet, with sheer ice walls. Davies was wedged partway down. His pack caught on an outcropping. Blood stained the snow where his head had hit the ice. We need rope, Carson said. Morris, you got any? Some. Not sure if it's enough. They tied together what rope they had. Morris's length plus some spare cordage from the packs. Barely enough. Carson wrapped it around his waist. I'll go down, he said. Rest of you anchor me. It took an hour. An hour of careful maneuvering, of Carson descending into the crevasse while the others held the rope, of getting Davies, semi-conscious and bleeding, secured and hauled back up. By the time they got him to the surface, everyone was shaking with exhaustion and cold. Davies' ankle was clearly broken now. His head wound was worse, and they were still a day and a half from the lodge. We need to move, Elara said. He needs treatment, real treatment. They fashioned a travois from branches and rope, taking turns dragging Davies. It slowed them down even more, but there was no choice. They reached the lodge just after midnight, 2 days late, everyone half frozen and completely spent. Rowan was waiting at the door. Elara had never been so happy to see anyone in her life. Davies needs help, she gasped out. Broken ankle, head injury, maybe more. Rowan didn't waste time with questions. He organized people to carry Davies inside, to the warmest spot near the fire. One of the women who'd been a midwife once examined him carefully. Concussion for sure, she announced. Ankle's bad, but I can set it. He'll live, but he'll be off that leg for weeks. Elara sank down onto a bench, her legs finally giving out. She'd made it. They'd all made it. James sat beside her, looking as exhausted as she felt. That was insane. Yeah. When do we go back? Despite everything, Elara smiled. Give it 3 days. Let everyone recover. Then we go again. You're serious? Completely. Over the next weeks, a pattern developed. Teams would rotate. 3 days out to the valley, load up, 3 days back, 3 days rest, then out again. It was grueling work. People got injured. People got sick. But they kept going. The food started coming in. Not a lot. Not enough to completely solve their problems, but enough to extend their timeline. To give them hope. Nathan didn't stay quiet. He couldn't directly attack them again. The evidence of the storage shed fire had been too obvious, and even the corrupt settlement authorities had taken notice. But he found other ways to make trouble. He spread rumors that Rowan was hoarding supplies while people in the settlement starved, that the lodge was harboring criminals, that diseases were spreading there, making it a danger to the whole region. None of it was true. All of it made their situation harder. People are starting to believe him, Carson reported after one of his trips to trade furs. Heard some folks saying maybe the lodge should be shut down, for public safety. Let them talk, Rowan said. But Elara could see the worry in his eyes. One night in late January, Margaret showed up again, this time without Nathan, and without her usual haughty demeanor. She looked tired, almost afraid. I need to talk to you, she said to Rowan, privately. They went into his office. Elara pretended not to watch, but she positioned herself nearby where she could overhear. Nathan's planning something, Margaret's voice drifted through the door. Something big. What kind of something? I don't know exactly. He's been meeting with people from the territorial authorities, talking about declaring the lodge unsafe, getting it condemned. He can't do that. He can if he has the right people on his side, and Nathan's very good at getting people on his side. A pause. I shouldn't be telling you this. If he finds out, why are you telling me? Silence. Then quietly, because I'm tired of watching him destroy people. Because what he did to your storage shed was wrong, and I should have stopped it. Because... Another pause. Because you were right about him, and I was wrong. Rowan's response was too quiet for Elara to hear, but a few minutes later Margaret left, looking shaken. Rowan came out of the office and found Elara. You heard? Most of it. We need to be ready. If Nathan's moving officially against us, we need evidence, documentation, something to prove we're running a legitimate operation here. How do we do that? Records, accounts, proof we're feeding people, sheltering people, operating within the law. He ran a hand through his hair. It's going to be a lot of work. When isn't it? They spent the next days organizing everything. Rowan's account books were a mess. He was good at many things, but bookkeeping wasn't one of them. Elara helped sort through the chaos, creating clear records of who they'd helped, what supplies they'd used, where their food came from. It was tedious work, made harder by the fact that they were both exhausted from everything else. But it was necessary. You're good at this, Rowan observed, watching Elara organize a particularly complicated set of transactions. My father kept books for his blacksmith shop. I used to help him. The memory was bittersweet. He said numbers didn't lie. If you recorded them honestly, they'd always tell you the truth. Smart man. He was. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Rowan said, when this is over, when winter breaks and the pass is open, what will you do? Elara looked up, surprised. What do you mean? Will you stay? or move on. She'd been so focused on surviving that she hadn't thought past spring. I don't know, haven't thought about it. Think about it. Rowan's gray eyes were serious. Because I'd like you to stay. This place works better with you in it. It wasn't a declaration, wasn't poetry or romance, just a simple statement of fact, but it meant everything. I'll think about it, Elara said quietly. February came with the worst storm yet. It started as light snow and built over 3 days into a howling blizzard that buried the lodge under drifts taller than a man. The wind screamed like something dying. The temperature dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows. No one could go outside. The valley expedition stopped. Everyone was trapped inside, packed together for warmth, burning through fuel and food at an alarming rate. On the 4th day of the storm, the main chimney cracked. Smoke started pouring into the common room instead of going out. People began coughing, eyes streaming, scrambling for fresh air that didn't exist. Rowan tried to fix it, climbing onto the roof in the middle of the blizzard. Elara watched from below, her heart in her throat, as he disappeared into the white chaos above. He came back down an hour later, half frozen, covered in snow and soot. It's blocked. Ice buildup. I cleared what I could, but it's going to keep happening until the weather breaks. They moved everyone into the kitchen and 2 adjoining rooms, the only spaces with working chimneys. 47 people crammed into areas meant for maybe 15. It was miserable. Claustrophobic. Tempers flared. People snapped at each other over nothing. A fight broke out on the 6th day. 2 men arguing over space near the fire, pushing and shoving until punches were thrown. Rowan broke it up, but the tension didn't dissipate. "We're not going to make it," someone muttered. "We're going to kill each other before we starve." Elara looked around at the frightened, exhausted faces. They needed something, not food. She couldn't make food appear, not warmth. There was only so much fuel. But maybe something else. She started telling stories. Not grand tales, just simple memories. Her father's blacksmith shop. The time she'd accidentally burned an entire batch of bread and tried to hide it. The traveling merchant who'd taught her to make pasta from scratch. James picked up the thread, sharing his own stories. Then Morris. Then others. The stories weren't all happy. Some were sad, some bitter, some angry. But they were human. Real. Reminders that they were people, not just bodies trying to survive. The storm finally broke on the 8th day. The silence when the wind stopped was almost shocking. People emerged from their cramped quarters like survivors of a shipwreck, blinking in the sudden light. The damage was extensive. Drifts covered everything. The main chimney was completely unusable. 3 windows had shattered from the pressure of ice, and they'd burned through almost all of their remaining fuel. But they'd survived. Elara and Rowan stood outside, surveying the destruction. The world was white and still and absolutely unforgiving. "We're going to run out," Rowan said quietly. "Even with the valley runs, even with everything we're doing, the math doesn't work." "I know. So what do we do?" Elara looked at the mountains, at the settlement barely visible in the distance, at the lodge full of people depending on them. "We keep fighting. What else can we do?" Rowan almost smiled. "Nothing else. Just wanted to make sure you knew what we're up against." "I've always known." He reached out and took her hand, just for a moment. His fingers were rough and cold, and the gesture was over almost before it began. But it happened, and Elara held that moment like a small flame against the dark. The days after the storm were the hardest yet. Everything they'd carefully rationed, every calculation Elara had made, all of it fell apart when they had to burn extra fuel just to keep people from freezing to death. The food stores dwindled faster. The woodpile shrank to almost nothing. And the next valley expedition couldn't leave because half the team was still recovering from frostbite and exhaustion. Elara stood in the kitchen, staring at what was left. 2 sacks of flour, maybe 10 pounds of dried beans, some salt pork so old it was more salt than pork, a handful of potatoes, most of them sprouting. This was supposed to feed 47 people for another 6 weeks until spring thaw. She did the math again, and again, hoping she was wrong. She wasn't. "We have 8 days, she told Rowan that night. They were in his office, the door closed, keeping their voices low so no one outside would hear. "Maybe 10 if we cut portions to almost nothing." Rowan's face was stone. "And then?" "And then we have nothing." He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the darkness. The settlement lights twinkled in the distance, warm and safe and completely unreachable. The Valley expedition can't go out for at least another 3 days. Even if they leave then, they won't be back in time. I know. So we're finished. Not yet. Elara's voice was harder than she felt. There's still the settlement. We could try to buy supplies. From who? Nathan controls most of the trade now. He's not going to sell to us. Then we steal them. Rowan turned to look at her. What? You heard me. We take what we need. Hit his warehouses, his storage. That's insane. We'd be arrested. Hanged, probably. Only if we get caught. Elara met his eyes. And only if there's anyone left to enforce the law. Nathan's been spreading rumors that we're dangerous, criminal. Maybe it's time we lived up to his accusations. No. Rowan's voice was flat. I won't do that. Won't turn us into what he says we are. Then what? We sit here and starve with our principles intact? We find another way. There is no other way. Elara's control finally cracked. I've looked at every option, run every number. We're out of time, Rowan, out of food, out of choices. So either we do something desperate or we start deciding who gets to eat and who doesn't. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush. I can't ask people to become thieves, Rowan said finally. Can't ask them to risk hanging for... You don't have to ask. I'll do it myself. Elara, I'm not afraid of Nathan. I'm not afraid of getting caught. I'm afraid of watching children starve because we were too proud to fight dirty. She stood up. You don't have to approve. You don't even have to know about it. Just don't stop me. She walked out before he could argue further. James found her an hour later, packing a small bag in her room. He stood in the doorway, watching her with those 2 old eyes. You're going to do something stupid, he observed. Probably. Need help? Elara looked at him. He was so young, barely more than a kid. But he'd proven himself tougher than most grown men, and she trusted him in a way she didn't trust many people. You sure? This could go very wrong. Most things do. I'm still here. He came into the room. What's the plan? The plan was simple and terrible. Nathan's main warehouse was on the edge of the settlement, poorly guarded because no one had ever been desperate or crazy enough to rob it. They'd go in at night, take what they could carry, flour, dried goods, anything that would keep people alive, and be gone before anyone noticed. Simple, terrible, necessary. They left just after midnight when the lodge was quiet and everyone was asleep. Elara left a note for Rowan, just in case they didn't come back. She didn't say where she was going or what she was doing, just, I'm sorry, take care of them. The walk to the settlement took 2 hours through knee-deep snow. James was faster than Elara, but he matched her pace without complaint. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say. The warehouse was exactly where Margaret had mentioned it once, months ago, in some conversation Elara had only half listened to. A large wooden structure with a sagging roof and walls that had seen better days. 2 windows, both dark, 1 door, probably barred from inside. How do we get in? James whispered. Elara studied the building. The roof. That sag means rotted beams. If we can get up there, we might be able to get through. And if we fall through, then we fall through. They circled around to the back where the shadows were deepest. James boosted Elara up to the roof. It took both of them grunting and swearing because she wasn't light, and then she reached down to help pull him up after her. The roof was worse than it looked. The beams were half rotted, the shingles loose and missing in places. Elara tested each step carefully, distributing her weight, moving slowly toward the sagging section. When she found the weak spot, she used the small hatchet they'd brought to carefully pry up shingles. The wood underneath was soft with rot. She broke through with almost no effort. The hole was barely big enough to fit through. James went first, dropping down into the darkness below. Elara heard him land with a soft thud. Clear, he whispered up. Elara lowered herself through the hole, hanging by her hands for a moment before dropping. She landed hard, pain shooting through her ankles, but nothing broke. They were in. The warehouse was packed with supplies, sacks of flour, barrels of salt pork, dried beans, sugar, coffee, things Elara hadn't seen in months. It was obscene, this abundance, while people at the lodge were starving. How much can we carry? James asked. As much as possible. Focus on high-value items, flour, dried meat, sugar. They worked quickly, filling their packs and 2 extra sacks they'd brought. Elara's pack grew so heavy she could barely lift it. She didn't care. This was food. This was life. They were almost done when they heard it. Voices outside, footsteps. "Someone's coming," James breathed. Elara's heart hammered. They couldn't go out the door. Whoever was outside would see them. They couldn't go back through the roof, not with the heavy packs, not without making noise. "Hide," she whispered. They ducked behind a stack of barrels just as the door opened. Lamplight spilled in, and with it, voices. "Told you I heard something." That was Nathan's voice, smooth and cold. Probably just rats. Another man, unfamiliar. "Check anyway. Someone's been poking around my property lately." Footsteps. Getting closer. Elara pressed herself against the barrel, trying to make herself smaller. Beside her, James was completely still, barely breathing. The lamplight swept across the warehouse. Elara could see the shadow of whoever was holding it, moving between the stacks, searching. "See anything?" Nathan called from the door. "Nothing yet." "Wait. There's something here, hole in the roof." "What?" Nathan's footsteps now, moving fast. They were caught. Elara knew it. In seconds, Nathan would find them, and it would all be over. She made a decision. "Run," she whispered to James. "When I create a distraction, you run. Get back to the lodge. Don't stop." "I'm not leaving you." "That's an order." Before he could argue, Elara stood up. "Looking for me, Nathan?" The man with the lamp spun around, raising it high. Nathan appeared beside him, his face shifting from surprise to satisfaction. "Well, Elara Boone, I have to admit I didn't think you had it in you." He smiled. "Theft, breaking and entering. The territorial marshal is going to love this." "James, run!" Elara shouted. James burst from behind the barrels and sprinted for the door. The man with the lamp tried to grab him, but James was faster. He ducked under the man's arm and disappeared into the night. Nathan didn't even try to stop him. He was too focused on Elara. "You've just given me everything I needed. Rowan's cook, caught stealing from a legitimate business. This will destroy what's left of his reputation." "Your legitimate business where you hoard food while people starve?" "I'm a businessman. I charge market rates." "You're a vulture." Nathan's smile didn't waver. "Say what you want. Won't change the fact that you're going to jail. And once word spreads that Rowan's people are thieves, the authorities will shut down that lodge so fast." He didn't get to finish. Elara swung her pack, still full of stolen goods, and hit him square in the chest. He staggered backward, tripped over a sack of flour, and went down hard. The man with the lamp lunged for Elara. She dodged, but her pack threw off her balance. She stumbled, fell, the heavy bag pinning her down. "Got her," the man said, grabbing her arm. Elara struggled, but he was stronger. He twisted her arm behind her back hard enough to make her gasp. "Don't move." Nathan got to his feet, brushing flour off his expensive coat. His smile was gone, replaced by cold fury. "You're going to regret that." "Probably, but it felt good anyway." He hit her, a sharp blow across the face that made her vision blur. She tasted blood. "Lock her up," Nathan told his man. "I'll get the marshal in the morning. By tomorrow night, this will all be over." They dragged Elara out of the warehouse and across the settlement to a small building she'd never noticed before. It was barely more than a shed, with one tiny window and a door that locked from the outside. They threw her in, and the door slammed shut. Elara sat in the darkness, her face throbbing, her arm aching from where the man had twisted it. She'd failed. Failed to get the food back to the lodge. Failed to avoid getting caught. Failed everyone who was depending on her. But at least James had gotten away. At least he could warn Rowan. She didn't know how long she sat there. Hours, maybe. The cold seeped through the walls, through the floor, into her bones. She thought about the lodge, about the people there, about Rowan. She thought about his hand in hers during the storm, about the knife he'd given her, about the way he'd said, "You matter," like it was a fact, not a kindness. She'd told him she was too stubborn to die. Time to prove it. The window was small, but Elara was desperate. She examined it carefully. The frame was old wood, warped and loose. She worked her fingers around the edges, pulling, prying, ignoring the splinters digging into her skin. It took forever. Her fingers went numb. Her shoulders screamed. But slowly, the frame began to give. When it finally came loose, the gap was barely wide enough. Elara squeezed through, scraping skin off her arms and back, not caring. She dropped into the snow outside and started running. Or tried to. Her legs were stiff from sitting in the cold, and the snow was deep. She managed more of a fast stumble, heading away from the settlement toward the mountains, toward home. She'd made it maybe half a mile when she heard shouts behind her. Someone had discovered her escape. They'd be coming after her soon. Elara pushed harder. Her lungs burned. Her legs felt like they might give out. But she kept moving. The sky was starting to lighten, dawn coming. She could see the lodge now, a dark shape against the mountains. So close. Just a little further. She heard horses behind her. They were faster than she could ever be. She wasn't going to make it. And then, impossibly, there were people in front of her, coming from the lodge. Rowan at the front, with James and Carson and Morris behind him, all of them armed. "Elara!" Rowan's voice carried across the snow. She stumbled toward them, fell, got back up. Rowan caught her before she could fall again. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm sorry. I tried to—" "Later. Can you walk?" "I think so." "Then let's go." But the riders were too close. Nathan and 4 men, all on horseback, blocking their path back to the lodge. "That's far enough," Nathan called out. "That woman is under arrest for theft. Hand her over." "Not a chance." Rowan stepped in front of Elara, his rifle raised. "Don't be stupid, Rowan. The law is on my side." "The law? Right. The same law that looked the other way when you burned my storage shed?" Nathan's expression didn't change. "I don't know what you're talking about. I know you did it. Everyone knows you did it. You want to talk about theft? Let's talk about how you've been stealing from this entire region for years, overcharging for supplies, creating artificial shortages, destroying anyone who competes with you." "That's business. What she did was crime." Nathan gestured to his men. "Take her." The men moved forward. Rowan's group raised their weapons. For a moment, everything hung in balance. 2 groups of armed men facing off in the snow, 1 woman between them. "You really want to do this?" Rowan's voice was quiet, dangerous. "Really want to start a fight you might not walk away from? You're threatening me? I'm promising you, you want her, you'll have to go through all of us. And I don't think you've got the stomach for that." Nathan's jaw tightened. Elara could see him calculating, weighing options. He was used to getting what he wanted through money and manipulation, not direct confrontation. "This isn't over," he said finally. "It never is with you." Nathan wheeled his horse around and rode back toward the settlement, his men following. But Elara knew he was right. This wasn't over. If anything, she'd just made everything worse. They got back to the lodge in silence. The men dispersed, going back to their rooms or their morning routines. Rowan took Elara to his office and closed the door. "What were you thinking?" His voice was controlled, but she could hear the anger underneath. "I was thinking we were out of options." "So you decided to risk your life, risk making everything worse?" "I got caught. I know, but if I hadn't, we'd have food right now. And we'd be thieves, criminals. Everything Nathan says we are." Elara stood up, her own anger rising. "We're starving, Rowan. People are starving. I don't care about being noble anymore. I care about keeping them alive." "At what cost?" "At any cost." The words hung between them. Rowan stared at her, and she stared back, neither willing to back down. "You don't get it," Elara said, quieter now. "You can afford principles. You're strong, experienced, capable. But some of us don't have that luxury. Some of us have spent our whole lives being told we're not good enough, not worthy, not valuable. And then we find a place where we might actually matter, and we'll do whatever it takes to protect it." Rowan's expression softened slightly. "You matter here regardless of what you do." "Do I? Or do I only matter because I'm useful? That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Elara's voice cracked. "My whole life, I've only been valuable when I could provide something, cook something, do something. The moment I stop being useful, I stop mattering. That's just how it is." "Not here. Not to me." The words were quiet, but they stopped Elara cold. Rowan took a step closer. "You think I value you because you cook?" "I valued you the moment you walked up that mountain alone. Before you'd made a single meal. Before you'd proven anything. I valued you because you had the courage to try when everyone else told you no." Elara felt something crack open in her chest. "Then why are you angry?" "Because you could have died. Because I... He stopped himself. Because we need you, and not just for food. They stood there, close enough that Elara could see the gray in his beard, the lines around his eyes, the scar that ran down his face, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him in the cold room. "I'm sorry," she said, "for making things worse, for..." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle or romantic. It was desperate and rough and tasted like fear and relief, and too many emotions to name. Elara froze for half a second, then kissed him back just as hard. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavy, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "Don't do that again," he said. "Which part?" "Risk yourself. I can't..." His voice was rough. "I can't lose you." "You won't. You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll fight to come back." He kissed her again, softer this time, then stepped back, putting distance between them like he didn't trust himself. "We need a real plan," he said, all business again. "Nathan's going to come back with the marshal. We need to be ready." "What kind of ready?" "I don't know yet, but we've got maybe a day to figure it out." They spent the rest of the morning preparing. Rowan gathered all the documentation they'd compiled, the account books, the records of who they'd helped, everything that proved they were operating legally. Elara went through the kitchen, taking inventory one more time, trying to figure out how to stretch their remaining supplies. Carson pulled her aside around noon. "Heard what you did, trying to rob Nathan." "You here to lecture me, too?" "Hell no. Just wanted to say I would have done the same thing." He glanced around, making sure no one else was listening. "And if you need help next time, count me in." "There won't be a next time." "We'll see." That afternoon, James approached her while she was making what passed for lunch, thin soup with more water than substance. "I got away because of you," he said quietly. "You got away because you're fast." "I should have stayed, helped you fight." Elara stopped stirring and looked at him. "You did exactly what you needed to do. You warned Rowan. You got people ready to come help. That's why I'm here instead of locked up. Still feels wrong, leaving you." "Listen to me." Elara put down the spoon. "There's going to come a time when you have to choose between doing the brave thing and doing the smart thing. And sometimes the smart thing feels like cowardice. But it's not. It's survival. You survived. That's what matters." James nodded slowly. "You sound like my ma before she died." "She must have been smart. Smartest person I knew." They worked in silence for a while. Then James said, "We're not going to make it, are we? Through winter." Elara wanted to lie, wanted to give him hope, but he deserved truth. "I don't know. Maybe not." "Then what do we do?" "We try anyway, because what else is there?" The marshal arrived the next morning with Nathan and 6 armed men. Elara watched from the kitchen window as they rode up to the lodge, official and imposing. Rowan met them outside. Elara couldn't hear what was being said, but she could see Nathan gesturing, pointing toward the lodge, making his case. The marshal, a thin man with a hard face, listened without expression. Finally, Rowan turned and walked back to the lodge. The marshal and his men followed. Elara's heart was pounding. This was it. They were going to arrest her, maybe shut down the lodge entirely. Everything they'd fought for, finished. The marshal stepped into the common room. Everyone inside went quiet. "I'm Marshal Davis," he announced. "I'm here investigating reports of theft and criminal activity at this establishment." "What kind of reports?" Rowan asked, his voice level. "Reports that a woman from this lodge broke into a warehouse in the settlement and stole supplies." "And who made these reports?" "Nathan Prescott, a legitimate businessman." "Who's been trying to put me out of business for 3 years," Rowan interrupted. "Who burned my storage shed to starve us out. Who's spread lies about this place to anyone who'll listen." Marshal Davis's expression didn't change. "You have proof of these accusations?" "Do you have proof of his?" "I have a witness. And a broken window in a warehouse. A witness who works for Nathan, and windows break all the time." Rowan crossed his arms. "You want to arrest someone for theft? You better have better evidence than that." The marshal looked around the common room. His eyes landed on Elara, and she forced herself not to flinch. "You're the cook?" he asked. "I am." "You break into Nathan Prescott's warehouse 2 nights ago?" Elara opened her mouth to lie. to deny everything. But before she could speak, James stepped forward. "I did it," he said. "What?" Elara stared at him. "I broke into the warehouse, tried to steal food. She had nothing to do with it." "James, no. It's true," Carson added, stepping up beside James. "I was with him. We both did it." "So was I," Morris said. One by one, the men started stepping forward, claiming responsibility, protecting her. "You're all lying," Nathan sputtered. "It was her. My man saw her." "Your man saw someone in the dark," Carson said calmly. "Easy to make a mistake." Marshal Davis held up a hand. Everyone stopped talking. He looked at Nathan. "You said you had a witness who could identify the thief." "I do. He saw her clearly." "Then bring him here. Let him point her out." Nathan's face went red. "He's back at the settlement. I can get him." "Then get him. Until then, I'm not arresting anyone based on your word alone." "This is ridiculous. She's right there." "And so are a dozen men all claiming they did it." "You want me to arrest all of them?" Marshal Davis shook his head. "I'll come back when you have real evidence. Until then, stay out of each other's way." He turned and walked out. Nathan stood there, shaking with fury. "This isn't over," he said, looking directly at Rowan. "So you keep saying." Nathan and his men left. The moment they were gone, the tension in the room broke. Men started talking, some laughing with relief. Elara looked at the men who'd stood up for her. "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, we did," James said. Carson nodded. "You've been feeding us for months, keeping us alive. Least we could do is return the favor." Rowan put a hand on her shoulder. "Told you, you matter here." Elara felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Thank you." "Don't thank us yet," Morris said grimly. "Nathan's going to come back, and next time he'll have better evidence." He was right. But for now, they'd bought themselves time. That night, Elara lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. The failed robbery, the arrest, the escape, the men standing up for her, Rowan's kiss. She touched her lips, remembering. It had been quick, desperate, probably a mistake born out of fear and relief, but it had felt real. A soft knock on her door. She sat up. "Yes?" The door opened. Rowan stood there, silhouetted against the lamplight from the hall. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much thinking." He came in, closing the door behind him, sat on the edge of her bed, careful to leave space between them. "About today," he started. "If you're going to apologize for kissing me, don't." "I wasn't. I was going to say we should probably talk about it." "Why? We're both adults. We kissed. It happened." And I don't know." Elara pulled her knees up to her chest. "I don't know what happens next. Don't know if we survive winter. Don't know if Nathan shuts us down. Don't know if—" Rowan reached over and took her hand. "I know one thing. When I thought I'd lost you, when James came back and said you'd been caught, I realized I care about you, not just as my cook, as you." Elara's throat tightened. "I care about you too. So maybe we don't worry about what happens next. Maybe we just take each day as it comes." "That's not very romantic." "I'm not a very romantic man." "No, but you're a good one." They sat there in the darkness, hands linked, finding comfort in simple presence. Tomorrow would bring new problems. But tonight, they had this. It was enough. Morning came too soon, gray and cold and unforgiving. Elara woke with Rowan's hand still in hers, both of them having fallen asleep sitting on her bed, too exhausted to care about propriety or what anyone might think. He woke when she moved, his eyes opening slowly, focusing on her face. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning." They sat there for a moment, neither moving, both aware that once they left this room, the world and all its problems would come crashing back. But for now, there was just this quiet space between sleep and waking. "I should go," Rowan said finally. "People will talk." "Let them." He smiled slightly. "You say that now." "I mean it. I'm tired of caring what people think." He stood, stretched, his joints cracking. "I'll get the fire started. You rest a bit longer." "Can't. Too much to do." "Elara, I'm fine. Really." She got up, ignoring her protesting muscles. "Besides, we're down to our last sack of flour. Need to make it count." The worry in his eyes was clear, but he didn't argue. He just nodded and left, closing the door softly behind him. Elara dressed quickly and went downstairs. The kitchen was freezing as always. She got the fire going, her hands moving through the familiar motions while her mind churned through calculations. 1 sack of flour. Maybe 8 pounds of beans. The salt pork was gone. The potatoes were gone. They had some wild greens left from the last valley run, but not many. She could make bread, thin soup, maybe stretch it to feed everyone for 3 more days, 4 if people didn't mind going hungry, and then nothing. She was measuring out flour when she heard shouting from outside. Not angry shouting, excited. She went to the window and saw people gathered near the road, pointing at something in the distance. Elara wiped her hands and went outside. The cold hit her like a fist, but she pushed through it to where the crowd had formed. "What's happening?" she asked James. He pointed. "Look, coming up the road was a wagon. No, multiple wagons. A whole caravan of them, moving slowly through the snow, pulled by teams of oxen, and they were heading straight for the lodge." "Who is that?" someone asked. "Don't know," Carson said, "but they're carrying supplies. Look at how those wagons are sitting. They're loaded heavy." Rowan appeared beside Elara, his rifle in his hands. "Everyone inside, until we know who they are." The wagons got closer. Elara could see now that there were maybe 6 of them, each piled high with crates and barrels covered in canvas. And riding on the lead wagon was a woman Elara recognized. Margaret. Rowan saw her too. His grip on the rifle tightened. "What's she doing here?" The wagons pulled up in front of the lodge. Margaret climbed down, her expensive dress completely inappropriate for the weather, but somehow she made it work anyway. She looked nervous, Elara realized. Actually, nervous. "Rowan," Margaret said, "I need to talk to you. I've got nothing to say to you. Please, just listen." She glanced at the crowd gathered around. "Privately?" Rowan looked at Elara. She shrugged. It was his decision. "Fine," he said. "My office, 5 minutes." They went inside. Elara started to follow, but Rowan shook his head. "Stay here, in case this is a trick." So she waited in the common room with everyone else, watching through the window as the wagon drivers stayed with their vehicles, not approaching the lodge. Whatever this was, it didn't feel like an attack. 10 minutes later, Rowan emerged from his office. His expression was unreadable. "Everyone outside," he called. "We need to unload these wagons." "What?" Carson stared. "You trust her?" "I trust that she brought us food. Everything else we'll figure out later. Now move." The men rushed outside. Elara followed more slowly, her mind trying to catch up with what was happening. The wagons were indeed loaded with supplies. Flour, beans, dried meat, salt, sugar, coffee, everything they'd been without for weeks. More than enough to last until spring thaw. Maybe beyond. "I don't understand," Elara said to Margaret, who was directing the drivers. "Why are you doing this?" Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "Because I'm tired of being complicit. Because Nathan's gone too far. Because—" She paused. "Because you were right about him. About all of it. What happened?" "I'll tell you inside, once everything's unloaded." It took 2 hours to get all the supplies into the lodge and properly stored. The men worked with an energy Elara hadn't seen in weeks, actual hope on their faces for the first time in forever. When it was done, Margaret sat in Rowan's office with him and Elara, a cup of coffee warming her hands. She looked exhausted. "Nathan's been planning to take over the lodge for months," she said. "Longer, probably. He saw it as the last piece he needed to control the entire region. When you wouldn't sell, he started looking for other options." "The storage shed," Rowan said. Margaret nodded. "That was his idea. Make it look like you couldn't keep your supplies safe. Make people question whether the lodge was viable. He thought it would break you." "Why are you telling us this now?" "Because yesterday he showed me his next plan." Margaret's voice shook slightly. "He's going to burn the lodge. With everyone in it. Make it look like an accident, a chimney fire maybe, or a lantern knocked over, something tragic but explainable." Elara felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. He'd kill 47 people just to get this building? He'd kill twice that if it got him what he wanted. Nathan doesn't see people. He sees obstacles or assets, and you're all obstacles. Margaret set down her coffee cup. "I couldn't be part of that, so I took his supplies the ones he's been hoarding while everyone else starves, and brought them here. He's going to come after you, Rowan said. I know. That's why I need your help. She looked between them. I have documents, records of everything Nathan's done. Price fixing, extortion, sabotage, enough to have him arrested if we can get it to the territorial authorities. But I can't do it alone. Rowan leaned back in his chair. You want us to protect you. I want us to help each other. You need supplies. I need safety. And we both want Nathan stopped. It was practical, calculating, exactly the kind of arrangement Margaret was good at. But Elara could see something else in the woman's eyes. Fear, yes, but also guilt. Maybe even something like remorse. We'll help you, Elara said before Rowan could answer. He looked at her. We will? She brought us food, warned us about the fire. That counts for something. Margaret's relief was visible. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Elara said. You're about to see how we really live here. It's not pretty. Over the next days, Margaret learned exactly what she'd signed up for. The work was constant and brutal. Elara put her to work in the kitchen immediately. If she was going to eat their food, she was going to earn it. Margaret had probably never done manual labor in her life, but to her credit, she tried. Her bread was terrible and her soup worse, but she kept at it. I don't know how you do this every day, Margaret said one evening, her hands red and raw from scrubbing pots. You do it because people need to eat. But don't you get tired, resentful? Elara thought about it. Sometimes, but then I remember what it was like before, going from town to town, getting rejected everywhere. At least here, the work matters. At least here I matter. Margaret was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry for how I treated you before, for what I said. You meant it at the time. I did, but I was wrong. She looked at Elara. You're stronger than I could ever be. Strength isn't about size or power. It's about getting back up when life knocks you down. You're here now. That takes strength too. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement, a starting point. The documents Margaret had brought were damning, pages and pages of evidence. Nathan's real account books showing how he'd manipulated prices, letters to suppliers demanding exclusive contracts, records of properties he'd acquired through intimidation, even a ledger showing payments to the local officials who'd looked the other way. Rowan studied them carefully. This is enough to hang him. If we can get it to someone who'll actually do something about it, Margaret said. Nathan owns most of the settlement authorities. What about the territorial marshal? Davis seemed honest. Maybe, but Nathan will know I took these documents by now. He'll be watching the roads, watching anyone who tries to leave. Then we don't go by road, Elara said. They both looked at her. The valley route, she continued, the one we've been using for supplies. It connects to the southern pass. From there, you can reach the territorial capital without going through the settlement. That route takes a week in good weather, Rowan said. In winter, it could take twice that, if you don't freeze or fall first. You got a better idea? He didn't. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Rowan would make the trip with the documents. He knew the route better than anyone and could survive the journey. Carson would go with him for backup. Margaret wanted to go too, to testify in person, but Rowan convinced her to stay. You're safer here than out there, and if something happens to us, someone needs to know what was in those documents. The night before they left, Elara helped Rowan pack supplies. They worked in silence, both aware that this might be the last time they saw each other. The journey was dangerous even without Nathan hunting for them. You'll be careful, Elara said. Not a question. I'm always careful. No, you're always stubborn. There's a difference. Rowan smiled slightly. Fair point. He finished tying his pack and turned to face her. If I don't make it back, don't. Elara, I said don't. You're coming back. Because if you don't, I'm going to be very angry with you. He pulled her close, kissed her hard. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. When this is over, he said quietly, when spring comes and the pass is open and everything settles, ask me again about staying. Why wait? Because I want you to have the choice. Not just stay because you're trapped here, but because you want to. I already want to. Then you'll still want to in spring. They stood there holding each other, knowing that words weren't enough but having no better options. Rowan and Carson left before dawn. Elara watched from the window as they disappeared into the gray light, two figures getting smaller and smaller until the mountains swallowed them whole. The waiting was agony. Days crawled by with no word, no sign. Elara threw herself into work, keeping the kitchen running, feeding people, staying busy so she wouldn't think about all the things that could go wrong. Nathan came on the fourth day. He arrived with a dozen men, all armed, all looking ready for violence. They surrounded the lodge, blocking the exits. Nathan himself rode right up to the front door and hammered on it with his fist. "Open up! I know Margaret's in there." Elara looked at James. "Get everyone away from the windows. Now!" The men scattered, grabbing what weapons they had, mostly hunting rifles and knives, nothing impressive. Elara went to the door but didn't open it. "What do you want, Nathan?" "I want what's mine. Margaret stole from me. She's going to answer for that." "She's not here." "Don't lie to me. I know she came here. Now open this door or I'll burn you out." Elara's blood went cold. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" "The territorial marshal is 3 days away. By the time anyone comes to investigate, this will all be a tragic accident. A chimney fire. These old buildings, they go up so fast. There are 47 people in here, women, children. Then they should leave. I'll give you 5 minutes. Anyone who wants to live, walk out now. Anyone who stays." He shrugged. "That's their choice." Elara turned from the door. The people in the common room were staring at her, fear written across every face. "You should go," she said. "Anyone who wants to leave, I understand." Nobody moved. "He's going to burn the lodge," Elara said. "You heard him. This isn't your fight." "Yeah, it is." That was Morris. "This is our home. We don't run." Others nodded, even the families with children, even the people who'd only been at the lodge a few weeks. "We stand together," Carson's wife said. She'd arrived a month ago, half frozen, with 2 kids and nowhere else to go. "That's what we do here." Elara felt something break open in her chest. These people, these broken, desperate, stubborn people, they'd become family without her even noticing. "All right," she said, "then we fight." They had maybe 10 guns total, some knives, a few axes for cutting wood. Not much against Nathan's dozen armed men, but they had something else. They had the high ground and they knew the building. "James, take 3 men upstairs, windows on the north side. Anyone tries to approach from that direction, you shoot." Elara was thinking fast, planning. "Morris, you and 4 others take the south. Margaret, you know how to shoot?" "Yes." "Good. You're with me. We'll cover the front." They spread out through the lodge, each person taking a position. Elara grabbed Rowan's spare rifle. He'd left it for her, knowing she might need it, and checked that it was loaded. Outside, Nathan's voice rang out. "Time's up. Last chance to walk away." Nobody answered. "Suit yourselves." Elara heard it before she saw it, the sound of something breaking, glass shattering, then smoke, pouring through a ground floor window on the east side. "They're throwing fire bottles," someone shouted. More breaking glass. More smoke. The lodge was old, dry timber that would burn fast once it really caught. They had minutes, maybe, before the whole place went up. "We need to put it out," Elara said. "Buckets? Water? Anything." "We don't have enough water," Margaret pointed out, "and we can't fight the fire and Nathan's men at the same time." She was right. They were trapped. Either they burned or they surrendered and let Nathan do whatever he wanted. Neither was acceptable. Elara looked around the lodge, this place that had become home, this place she'd fought so hard to save. There had to be something, some way out. Her eyes landed on the kitchen, on the stove, on an idea so crazy it might actually work. "The chimney," she said. "The main chimney is cracked, remember? Rowan couldn't fix it properly." "So?" James asked. "So it drafts wrong, pulls air through the lodge instead of just up and out." She was thinking out loud now. "If we could increase that draft, make it pull harder, we'd suck all the smoke up through the chimney instead of it spreading through the lodge," Margaret finished. "But how do we increase the draft?" "Fire. A bigger fire in the stove, hot enough to create a strong updraft." Elara was already moving toward the kitchen. "Help me." They piled wood into the stove, far more than was safe, creating an inferno. The heat was incredible, painful even from several feet away. But it worked. The draft increased, pulling smoke from the rest of the lodge up through the cracked chimney. It wasn't perfect. Smoke still leaked into the rooms, but it was breathable. They could function. Outside, Nathan was getting impatient. "I know you're still alive in there. Come out or we're coming in." "Try it," Elara shouted back. "We're armed, and we've got nothing to lose." A shot rang out, one of Nathan's men firing at the lodge. The bullet splintered wood near a window. James returned fire from upstairs, and one of Nathan's men yelped. More gunfire, back and forth. The noise was deafening. Elara crouched behind a table that she'd flipped on its side, trying to see through the smoke and chaos. They couldn't win this. Not really. They could hold out for a while, but eventually Nathan's men would overrun them, or the fire would spread too far to control, or they'd run out of ammunition. But she'd be damned if she'd just give up. She was reloading when she heard it. Horses. Lots of them. Coming fast. Nathan heard it too. He turned, and his face went pale. Riding toward the lodge was Marshal Davis, with at least 20 men, and at the front, leading them, were Rowan and Carson. They'd made it. They'd gotten the documents to the authorities and brought help. "Nathan Prescott," Marshal Davis's voice carried across the snow. "You're under arrest for arson, attempted murder, and about 24 other charges. Drop your weapons. Now." Nathan's men looked at each other, weighing their options. A few dropped their guns immediately. Others hesitated, looking to Nathan for guidance. Nathan himself looked trapped, cornered. His eyes darted between the marshal's men and the lodge, calculating odds that didn't exist. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice losing its usual confidence. "These people are criminals. We have your account books, your letters, everything." Marshal Davis dismounted. "You're done, Nathan." For a moment, Elara thought Nathan might fight anyway, go out in a blaze of violence rather than face justice. But then his shoulders sagged. The fight went out of him. "Fine," he said, "but you'll never make any of it stick. I have lawyers, resources. You had resources. Now you just have charges." The marshal gestured to his men. "Arrest him. And anyone who doesn't drop their weapons right now." The rest of Nathan's men surrendered quickly. Within minutes, they were all in custody, being led away on horseback toward the settlement. Elara stepped out of the lodge, barely believing it was over. Rowan rode up to her and dismounted in one smooth motion. Before she could say anything, he pulled her into his arms. "You're all right," he said into her hair. "You're all right." "I thought you weren't coming back." "Neither did I. The pass was worse than I expected. We almost turned around 3 times. He pulled back to look at her. "But we had to keep going, had to finish this." "And you did." "We did." Marshal Davis approached. "You're the cook, Elara Boone?" "I am." "Nathan was planning to kill you all. You know that?" "I know." "And you stayed anyway, defended this place." "It's my home." The marshal nodded slowly. "Well, your home nearly burned down, but we got here in time." He looked at the lodge, at the smoke still drifting from broken windows. "Going to take some repairs, but it's salvageable." "Everything's salvageable," Elara said, "if you're willing to do the work." Over the following weeks, they rebuilt. The broken windows were replaced, the damaged walls repaired, the cracked chimney finally fixed properly. Margaret stayed on. She had nowhere else to go, and honestly, she'd proven herself useful. She'd never be a great cook, but she could keep accounts better than anyone, and she had connections that helped establish proper supply lines. Nathan's trial was quick and brutal. With all the evidence against him, there was no question of guilt. He was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison, his property seized and sold off. The settlement itself began to change, freed from his control, becoming something closer to a real community. Spring came slowly, then all at once. The snow melted, the passes opened. Supply wagons could get through again. People who'd been trapped at the lodge for months were finally able to leave if they wanted to. Some did, heading back to families they'd been separated from, or moving on to new opportunities now that the weather permitted travel. But many stayed. The lodge had become more than just shelter. It had become what Rowan had always meant it to be, a place where people who didn't fit anywhere else could find belonging. Elara stood in the kitchen one morning in early April, watching the sun rise through the window. The kitchen was warm, the stove radiating heat, bread baking that smelled like everything good in the world. She'd lost count of how many meals she'd made here. how many people she'd fed, how many times she'd turned nothing into something. "You're up early." She turned. Rowan stood in the doorway, his hair still messy from sleep, wearing just a shirt and trousers despite the chill. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Too much thinking." "About what?" "About staying." He went very still. "And?" Elara smiled. "You told me to ask again in spring about staying, so I'm asking, do you want me to stay?" Rowan crossed the room in 3 steps and kissed her. When he pulled back, his gray eyes were warm in a way she'd never seen before. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not because we need a cook, not because you're useful, because I—" He stopped himself, then tried again. "Because I love you. And I can't imagine this place without you. I love you too." The words felt strange and right all at once. "So I guess I'm staying." "Good." They stood there, holding each other in the kitchen as the bread baked and the sun rose and the world outside came alive with spring. Later that day, James found Elara chopping vegetables for dinner. He'd gotten taller over the winter, filled out some. He'd be leaving soon, heading to the city to apprentice with a tradesman, but for now he was still here. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Always." "Was it worth it? Everything you went through to stay here, the rejection, the danger, nearly dying a few times. Was it worth it?" Elara thought about it. About the woman who'd walked up the mountain months ago, desperate and alone and convinced she had no value. About everything that had happened since, the hunger, the cold, the fear, but also the community, the purpose, the love. "Yeah," she said. "It was worth it. Because I learned something important." "What's that?" "That your value doesn't come from other people accepting you. It comes from you deciding you're worth fighting for. Everything else follows from that." James nodded slowly. "I think I understand." "You will, eventually." He went back to whatever task he'd been working on. Elara kept chopping, her hands steady, her mind quiet. That evening, the lodge was full. Not packed like during the worst of winter, but comfortably full. People laughing, talking, eating the meal Elara had made. Simple food, nothing fancy, just good ingredients prepared with care. Rowan sat at his usual table near the fire, watching it all with something that might have been contentment. Margaret was arguing with Carson about something. They'd developed an odd friendship based on mutual stubbornness. Morris was teaching one of the kids how to carve wood. James was flirting badly with a new girl who'd arrived last week. It was ordinary. Beautifully, perfectly ordinary. Elara brought Rowan his plate and sat down beside him. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him. "You did this, you know," he said quietly. "Made this place what it is. We did this. Together. Maybe. But you started it, just by showing up." Elara looked around at the lodge, at the people, at everything they'd built. She thought about the notice she'd pulled off that wall all those months ago. Remote mountain lodge, cook needed, harsh conditions, no quitters. She'd expected harsh conditions. She'd found something else entirely. Found a place where being too much wasn't a flaw, where her size didn't matter, where her value came from, who she was. Not what others thought she should be. Found home. "I'm glad I showed up," she said. "So am I." Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unforgiving. But inside the lodge, there was warmth. There was food. There was laughter and argument and life in all its messy, complicated glory. And there, in that kitchen that had once been a disaster, and was now the beating heart of everything, Elara Boone had found exactly what she'd been looking for without even knowing she was searching. Not acceptance, not validation, not someone else's approval, just the simple, radical knowledge that she was enough, had always been enough, would always be enough. Everything else was just details. The fire crackled, the food was eaten. The night settled in warm and comfortable, and in the morning, Elara would wake up and start all over again, cooking, feeding, caring for the people who'd become family, not because she had to, not because she was trying to prove something, but because she wanted to, because it mattered, because she mattered, and that, more than anything else, was what made the difference. The woman no one wanted had become the person everyone needed, not by changing who she was, but by finding a place that saw her clearly and chose her anyway. That was worth more than all the acceptance in the world. That was worth everything.